Elias Vance stumbled through the storm like a man already half buried. The midnight sky cracked with lightning, and the rain came down in sheets, drumming against the lake and hammering the wooden planks of the Ferrer family's small cabin. The wind carried the sharp scent of wet pine and smoke from distant fires. Inside, Clara Ferrer stood barefoot on the rough floorboards, her dark hair loose, her hand clutched tightly in her mother's. Helen's face was set in stone, her eyes narrowing at the sound that broke through the storm. A pounding, heavy and desperate, echoing through the night. Clara froze. Helen's grip tightened. Another knock. 3 strikes that rattled the door on its hinges. Helen whispered, "Stay back." She lifted the rifle from the wall, the wood worn smooth from years of use. Clara could hear her own pulse louder than the thunder. She wanted to obey, but something in the sound of those knocks felt less like a threat and more like the cry of someone on the edge of death. The latch shook. Helen raised the barrel, but Clara stepped forward despite herself. With one more strike, the door gave way, blowing open against the wind. A man staggered in. He was soaked to the bone, mud dripping from his boots, blood staining his shirt. His coat hung open, and from its folds glinted the edge of a worn badge, bent and battered as though even the law had tried to forget him. His face was pale, lips trembling. "Help me, or I'll die." His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper swallowed by thunder. Helen's rifle stayed trained on him, her jaw clenched tight. Clara saw the hole in his side, the black stain spreading across his ribs. Without thinking, she lunged forward, sliding beneath his arm to steady him. The man collapsed into her, heavier than she expected, his breath ragged against her shoulder. "No," Helen barked, stepping forward. "Not him. Not tonight," Clara shot back. "He's dying." Helen's eyes burned with memory. Raids that left their home in ashes years ago. Soldiers who promised protection and delivered only death. She saw in this man every betrayal carved into her bones. "Better he dies outside," Helen said, but Clara dragged him inside anyway, half carrying him toward the hearth where the fire smoldered low. She pushed him down onto the rug and grabbed a rag, pressing it against his wound. His body shuddered, and he caught her wrist, gripping with surprising strength for a man so broken. "They're coming," he rasped. Clara leaned close. "Who?" His eyes flicked toward the door as though he expected it to burst open again. "Men, at dawn. They'll burn it all, the homes, the lake, everyone here." Helen scoffed, her voice sharp as the rifle in her hands. "Lies. Outsiders always bring trouble, always with a story meant to drag us into their war." The man coughed, spitting blood into the rag. "I was one of them once, lawman. I swore to protect this land. They turned on me when I spoke the truth. I ran. They'll follow my trail straight here." The storm rattled the roof, shaking loose a trickle of rain that dripped onto the floorboards. Clara's stomach twisted. She didn't want to believe him, but the desperation in his voice sounded too real, too raw to be a trick. Helen stepped closer, her voice trembling with both rage and fear. "If you bring death to my door, I'll put you back in the mud where you belong." Clara pressed harder against the wound, her own hands slick with his blood. She felt the tremor in his body, the way he fought to stay upright, to stay alive long enough to speak. "I don't care what happens to me," he whispered, "but they will kill you all. Unless—" He broke off, a wave of pain pulling him under. Clara leaned closer, shaking his shoulder. "Unless what?" His eyes rolled back, unfocused, but his lips moved around the word. "Proof. Under the bridge." Helen scoffed again, but her knuckles whitened around the rifle. The storm roared louder, slamming the door shut with a gust. Clara turned, heart hammering, just in time to catch it. The flicker of movement at the window. A shadow. Someone outside, watching. The stranger's warning hadn't been carried by the storm alone. Words? Lantern light painted the cabin walls in trembling gold. The shadows stretching long and restless with every gust of wind that rattled the shutters. Elias lay against the hearth, his shirt torn open, the rag at his side already soaked red. His breath came shallow, but his eyes were sharp now, fixed on Clara as though he had dragged himself back from the edge of death for this moment alone. "I swore once," he murmured, his voice rough but steady. "I swore to guard this land, to hold to a treaty that was meant to bind law to honor. But law bends easy when gold is poured on it. The sheriff, he sold it. Sold your home, sold the lake, sold every stone and pine tree to the railroad." Clara's hand faltered on the rag. The thought of the lake, her lake, The place where she had hidden through childhood storms, where her father's laughter once carried across the water, being blasted apart for tracks and iron, made her throat tighten. She looked at her mother, but Helen's gaze was fixed on the stranger, unflinching as if daring him to finish. "My husband died in a skirmish over that treaty," Helen said coldly. Her knuckles whitened on the rifle. "Died for promises written by men who never meant to keep them. You speak of honor, stranger, but I see nothing in you worth a grave." Elias's jaw clenched. He reached inside his coat, pulling free the bent badge. He set it on the floorboards where the lantern glow caught the metal. It was scratched, battered, but the emblem of federal law still glimmered faintly. "They can bury me in the dirt for all I care," he said. "But I didn't run empty-handed. I kept a proof. The original treaty signed and sealed. I hid it beneath the old wooden bridge by the lake. That paper, if it sees daylight again, could stop the railroad, stop the sheriff, stop all of this." Clara felt her breath quicken. Her eyes flicked to her mother, but Helen only shook her head, her mouth hard as stone. "We owe him nothing," Helen spat. But Clara couldn't silence the pull in her chest, the strange certainty that this broken man carried more than his own survival. She whispered, almost to herself, "If it's true." Helen's gaze snapped to her daughter. "Truth has a cost, Clara. Always, you dig for it, you bleed for it, and sometimes it buries you." The wind outside dropped for a moment, leaving the room too quiet. Clara could hear the stranger's labored breathing, the crackle of firewood, the creak of the old beams. Then out of the silence, a single gunshot cracked across the valley. Helen froze. Elias lifted his head weakly. Clara felt the sound rattle through her bones. The riders had already come. Flames licked the horizon like the mouth of hell opening wide, painting the clouds with a red glow that fought against the storm's dying thunder. The settlement stirred in panic, children crying, men shouting, women rushing to gather what little could be saved. Horses snorted and stamped in the mud as armed riders swept through the narrow lanes, their torches throwing wild shadows against the walls of cabins. The riders moved with purpose, rifles slung across their shoulders, pistols glinting at their hips. At their head rode Harlan Cole, the sheriff's deputy, his broad frame outlined in firelight, his face carved with cruelty. His voice carried through the smoke. "Out of your homes," he barked. "Show yourselves or burn with what's left." Cole's men slammed doors with rifle butts, dragging settlers out into the open, kicking over rain barrels to spill the last of the water. A dog barked and a shot silenced it. Fear spread like the flames themselves. Clara crouched in the shadows, her heart pounding. Beside her, Elias leaned heavy on her shoulder, each step pulling a grimace across his pale face. His wound slowed him, but his eyes stayed locked ahead, toward the lake and the bridge that promised proof and hope. "We can't go this way," Clara whispered, pulling him into the dark gap between two cabins. Riders thundered past, torches blazing. The smell of pitch and smoke choked her throat. Elias's hand pressed against his bleeding side. "You trust me?" His words were quiet, more plea than question. Clara looked at him, her face hardened by firelight. "No, but I'll walk beside you." They moved fast, keeping low, slipping from shadow to shadow while the chaos raged around them. Clara knew these paths like the veins of her own hand, every bend, every worn plank of fence. She led him past the chapel, its bell silent, past the blacksmith shop where sparks hissed in the wet ground. Each step drew them nearer to the water's edge, where the smell of smoke gave way to the sharp scent of pine and lake mud. The glow of torches shimmered across the surface of the lake, rippling with the restless water. On the far bank, Cole's riders were searching, their shadows distorted in the reeds. Clara froze, pulling Elias down behind a fallen log. Her breath came fast, loud in her own ears. "They're sweeping both sides," she whispered. "Too close." Elias tried to rise, but she pushed him down again. She pointed toward a half-sunken dock jutting from the reeds. "There, underneath." He shook his head, but Clara didn't wait. She dragged him toward the water, the mud sucking at their boots. She shoved him down beneath the dock, the black water swallowing his body until only his face broke the surface, gasping. The splash carried across the still night. Hooves clattered against the shore as a rider turned his horse into the shallows. The animal's legs broke the water in heavy strides, ripples rolling outward. Clara pressed herself flat against the dock, her chest tight, her lips barely above water. She dared not breathe. The rider leaned down, his torch lowering toward the surface. The flame hissed in the damp air, its reflection trembling on the lake. Closer. He moved the torch side to side, scanning the ripples, eyes narrowing. The firelight danced across the dark water. Clara's heart hammered so loud she thought he might hear it. Then the light shifted and caught her reflection, pale and sharp in the black mirror of the lake. The rider leaned low in his saddle, the torch almost kissing the lake, its flame shivering with each ripple. Clara's chest burned with the effort of stillness. She prayed the water would hide her reflection, but the torch caught it again, a faint shimmer of her face, distorted but real. The man straightened, suspicion hardening his jaw. He shifted in the saddle, reaching for his pistol. Before the weapon cleared leather, the water exploded. Elias surged upward from beneath the dock like a man risen from the grave, his arm clamping around the rider's waist. Horse and man lurched. The animal screamed, kicking wildly as Elias wrenched the rider into the water. The torch fell, hissing out in the shallows. Darkness swallowed them whole. The struggle beneath the surface was violent and raw. Clara heard the splash of limbs thrashing, the muffled gasps cut short by choking water, the dull thud of fists connecting beneath the lake's skin. She gripped the slick planks of the dock, frozen, her breath shallow and panicked. A final muffled cry bubbled up through the water, then silence. Moments stretched long, broken only by the sound of the horse crashing back to shore. Then Elias broke the surface, gasping hard. Moonlight caught the blood streaming down his cheek, mixing with lake water. His eyes blazed, not just with survival, but with something Clara couldn't name. Something dangerous. She stared at him, shaken. The stranger she had pulled into her home was no helpless victim. He was something else entirely. "Move," he rasped, shoving wet hair from his eyes. "We don't have time." Clara swallowed her fear, forcing her legs to carry her forward. Together they slipped through reeds and mud, hearts pounding, each step pulling them closer to the bridge. Back in the settlement, Helen Farrer stood on her porch, rifle in hand. Her people gathered around her. Men with old muskets, women clutching hunting rifles, even boys with knives strapped to their belts. Their faces were pale but set with grim resolve. Helen raised the rifle high. "They'll burn us if we let them," she said, her voice sharp over the crackle of flames. "Not tonight. Not while my daughter walks in their path." The townsfolk nodded, a quiet strength settling among them. Helen's eyes burned as she led them into the dark. By the lake, Clara and Elias stumbled onto the old road that curved toward the wooden bridge. The structure rose out of the mist, black and looming. Relief flickered in Clara's chest until she saw the silhouette standing at its mouth. Two armed men, rifles resting in their hands, blocking the way forward. The bridge loomed out of the mist, its timbers black with age, its beams creaking with every breath of wind. The moon hung low and pale, casting silver light across the water. Clara froze at the sight of the two men blocking the path. Their rifles glinted, their faces shadowed but alert. Elias's hand brushed her arm, a silent warning. "They'll see us if we move," he whispered. Clara's eyes darted to the underside of the bridge, where moonlight died in shadows and the earth sloped down to black mud and water. A thought took root, wild and desperate. She crouched low. "I'll go under." Elias shook his head, jaw tight. "Too dangerous." "They're watching the road, not the river." Clara didn't wait for his reply. She slid down the embankment, the mud sucking at her boots, soaking the hem of her dress until it clung cold against her skin. The air beneath the bridge was damp, heavy with the smell of rot and stagnant water. She pressed herself flat against the mud, crawling deeper into the darkness. Above her, the guards shifted, one spitting over the edge into the river. His boot scraped against the planks. Clara held her breath, her fingers trembling as they dug into the wet earth. "Where the hell's Vance?" one of the men muttered. "Don't matter," the other said. "Cole wants his head. We see him, we shoot." A moment later, Elias's voice rang out, low but clear. "Don't shoot." "I'll come out." Clara's heart leapt. She twisted her head, peering through the gaps in the planks. She saw him step into the moonlight, his hands raised, his body swaying as though the wound had finally broken him. The guards' rifles rose in unison. "That's it, lawman," one sneered. "On your knees." Elias staggered, coughing, buying her seconds. Clara dug deeper, mud caking her nails, her breath coming fast. Her hands struck wood, splintered and damp, half buried beneath the soil. She clawed at it, pulling back broken boards until her fingers brushed against something wrapped in oilcloth. Her pulse hammered. She pulled it free, the bundle heavy with damp earth. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it. Inside lay folded parchment. The ink faded, but the seal still pressed deep into the wax. A general's mark. A treaty. Clara's throat tightened. Proof. The land had never been theirs to sell. Her father's death, the settlement's fear, it all spun around this single fragile bundle. Above, one of the guards barked, "Cole's not gonna like him alive." Clara hugged the papers to her chest, backing through the mud, ready to crawl out the far side of the bridge. She imagined racing to the settlement, showing the papers, stopping the fire before it spread. For the first time that night, hope stirred. Then the planks above her groaned. Heavy footsteps. A different weight, slower, deliberate. A voice cut through the dark, colder than the river itself. "Drop it, girl." A rifle barrel pushed down through the gap, its muzzle inches from her face. Clara froze, her chest heaving. She didn't need to see his face to know who it was. Cole himself had come, and his gun was aimed directly at her. Cole's fist clamped around Clara's arm like iron, jerking her up from the mud. The treaty bundle slipped from her grasp, snatched quickly by his other hand. Elias stumbled at her side, forced forward by the barrel of a guard's rifle pressing into his back. The bridge and the shadows behind it vanished as they were dragged toward the glow of fire on the horizon. The settlement lay in chaos. Flames licked at rooftops, smoke clawed at the sky. Villagers huddled together in the square, their faces pale with terror. Children clinging to their mothers. Cole's riders circled them like wolves, torches and rifles flashing in the restless light. The smell of burning pine mixed with the copper sting of fear. Cole strode ahead, dragging Clara with him, his broad shoulders dark against the fire. He mounted the steps of the chapel, turning to face the gathered crowd. With a sneer, he raised the bundle high. "This," he said, shaking the papers, "isn't worth the mud it was buried in. You think some faded ink and a general's seal will save you? No, I make the law here. My word is the only one that matters." A murmur rippled through the villagers. Elias, bruised and bleeding, lifted his chin. His voice cracked but carried. "You swore an oath, Cole. You signed as witness when that treaty was made. You sold your soul for railroad gold." Cole barked a laugh, deep and cruel. "And look what it bought me. Land, power, men who ride when I command. What did your oath buy you, Vance? A bullet in your ribs and dirt on your badge. You're no lawman, just a broken fool clinging to scraps." Clara wrenched free of Cole's grip and stepped forward, her face streaked with mud and blood. Her voice cut through the smoke like a blade. "The truth belongs to all, not you. That paper is ours. This land is ours." Cole's eyes narrowed, the smirk fading into something harder. He scanned the faces of the settlers, saw the flicker of hope her words had sparked. He spat on the ground. "Then here's my bargain," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Surrender your homes, your rifles, your pride peacefully. Or at dawn I'll hang a family from that bridge for every hour you defy me. First the fathers, then the sons, then the women, until there's nothing left but silence." Gasps broke through the crowd. Mothers pulled children close. Men lowered their eyes, despair pressing down like the smoke above. Elias staggered forward, but a rifle butt slammed into his chest, knocking him to the ground. Cole raised the treaty high again, waving it like a trophy. "This paper won't save you," he roared. "Nothing will." A new voice rang out, steady but trembling with fury. "We'll see about that," all eyes turned. Helen Ferrer stepped from the crowd, her rifle leveled, her hands shaking but her eyes burning with resolve. She aimed into the firelit smoke, finger tight on the trigger. No one could tell who her sights were set on. Cole, his men, or perhaps even the wounded stranger who had dragged her daughter into this night of blood. The crack of Helen's rifle shattered the night. For an instant, every man in the square thought she had aimed at Cole himself, but the shot split the noose rope strung across the gallows beam, dropping the bound villager hard to the dirt instead of leaving him to strangle. The man gasped, clutching his raw neck alive. Chaos erupted. Shouts rose as villagers scattered, some rushing to the fallen man, others stumbling toward cover. Cole spun, eyes blazing, fury carving deep lines in his face. "Shoot them! Shoot them all!" he roared. Riders jerked their rifles up, but Elias was already moving. With a desperate lunge, he tore the treaty bundle from Cole's grasp. He staggered under the weight of his own blood loss, yet his voice carried like a church bell over the din. "Truth doesn't burn," he shouted. His eyes found a boy in the crowd, no older than 12, skinny arms trembling as he clutched the hand of his frightened sister. Elias thrust the papers into the boy's chest. "Run!" To the mission bell, "Let it be read before God and men." The boy froze, wide-eyed. Elias gripped his shoulder, forcing him. Go! Then the boy bolted, clutching the bundle to his chest, legs pumping as fast as they would carry him across the square. His sister cried out, but Clara grabbed her, pulling her back to safety. Gunfire exploded. Sparks leapt from rifles, smoke coiled, screams rang out. Clara threw herself against her mother, dragging her toward the cover of the chapel wall. Bullets bit into the beams overhead, showering them with splinters. Helen reloaded with trembling hands, teeth clenched in defiance. Cole stormed forward through the smoke, shoving his men aside, revolver already raised. Stop that brat, he bellowed. Villagers tried to shield the boy, hurling themselves into the path of gunfire, but Cole's presence carved a path through them. His long coat snapped in the wind, his boots striking sparks from the cobblestones as he advanced. The boy reached the steps of the church, his thin legs flying, the bundle clutched tight. The chapel bell loomed above him, its iron tongue waiting to cry out across the valley. Cole's voice dropped low, almost a growl. Not another step! He leveled his revolver, the muzzle catching the glow of fire. The square seemed to hold its breath. Even the horses went still, eyes rolling white in the smoke. Clara saw it all in a heartbeat. The boy's small back, the fragile papers pressed to his chest, the revolver steady in Cole's hand. Her lungs seized, her throat raw. No, she screamed. But the sound was drowned in the chaos. Cole's finger curled on the trigger. The hammer fell. The shot cracked like thunder and chased the boy's shadow up the chapel steps. The gunshot split the night, echoing off the chapel walls, but the boy did not fall. Elias had thrown himself forward, slamming his shoulder into Cole's arm. The revolver's muzzle snapped skyward, the shot searing harmless into the bell tower instead of the child's back. The boy stumbled on the steps, clutching the treaty tighter. With a desperate cry, he leapt upward, his small hand catching the thick rope. He yanked it with all his weight. The bell tolled. Its iron voice rolled across the valley, deep and thunderous, cutting through the gunfire and screams. Every villager froze. Even Cole's men hesitated, their rifles lowering by instinct, heads turning toward the sound that could not be silenced. The boy pulled again, the bell booming louder, its echoes carrying to every corner of the settlement. Doors cracked open, frightened faces peered out. People who had hidden now stepped into the square, drawn by the call that had marked births, weddings, funerals, every moment of their lives. Smoke curled around the chapel as Elias staggered to his feet, blood running from his temple. He shouted hoarsely, "Read it! Read it to them!" The boy held the bundle aloft, shaking it. His small voice trembled but carried. "The treaty. It says this land is ours." A villager seized the papers, a schoolmaster whose spectacles reflected the firelight. He tore the oilcloth, unrolling the parchment with reverent hands. His voice quavered as he read, "Signed and sealed by the Office of the United States Army, guaranteeing to the Apache people and to the settlers of this valley perpetual right to these lands." Murmurs swept the crowd, hushed at first, then louder, a tide rising. Faces lifted, eyes widened. Cole's smirk faltered as men and women looked not at him, but at the parchment in the schoolmaster's hands. "He lied," someone whispered. "He sold us out," another muttered. Even Cole's riders shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. A few lowered their rifles, uncertain now, the weight of treachery pressing down on them. Clara stepped forward, her voice strong despite the smoke burning her throat. "This land isn't theirs to take. Not mine alone. Not yours alone. It lives if we live together." Her words struck like a hammer. Villagers nodded. Even some of the riders who had followed Cole for fear rather than loyalty. Hope stirred, fragile but real. Cole's face darkened. He strode forward, ripping the revolver free again. His voice boomed, raw with rage. "Enough of this. Paper and words won't stop me. You want justice? Then let's settle it the old way." He thrust the revolver toward Elias, gun to gun. "You and me." The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning. Elias swayed, his wound pulling at him, his strength drained by blood and battle. He looked at Clara, then at Helen, then at the boy still gripping the bell rope. Slowly he reached for his holster. The circle cleared, villagers backing away, torches casting a ring of light on the dirt. Cole stood tall, eyes burning with triumph as if he had already won. Elias stepped into the circle. His revolver felt heavy, his hand trembling as he lifted it. The firelight danced across his face, revealing doubt and exhaustion carved deep. His gun hand shook. The night broke into pale gray as dawn crept across the valley, the flames dying down to smoldering embers. Smoke hung low, curling through the trees. The crowd moved in a hushed tide toward the lake, drawn as though some unspoken law had commanded them there. The duel could not happen in the square, not among fire and ruin. It had to be at the water's edge where land and reflection met, where truth had been buried and clawed back into the light. Cole walked first, his boots striking hard against the damp earth, his coat torn but his stride unbroken. His eyes were fever bright, jaw set with the arrogance of a man who had carved his will into others too long to imagine it could ever break. Behind him a few riders followed, but most hung back uneasy now, their torches guttering. Elias followed slower, limping, his shirt stained dark with blood. Each step looked as if it might be his last, yet he pressed forward, revolver heavy in his hand. Clara trailed close, her breath sharp, every nerve urging her to drag him back to stop the madness. But she knew it was too late. Cole would never release them from his grip until one of them lay dead. The crowd gathered at the lake shore. Even the birds were silent, as though the valley itself held its breath. The first rays of dawn split the mist, painting the water in bands of silver and gold. The lake, restless all night, went still. Cole squared himself in the clearing, his revolver gleaming. "One shot's all it takes," he growled. "Let the people see who their lawman truly is." Elias raised his weapon, though his hand trembled. He drew a long breath, steadying himself. The air between them stretched tight, thinner than a thread, ready to snap. Then Cole fired. The crack tore the silence apart. The bullet seared across Elias's shoulder, spinning him back a step. Blood sprayed across the reeds. Gasps rose from the crowd. Clara cried out, rushing forward, but Helen's hand caught her arm like steel, holding her back. Elias staggered, knees buckling. For a moment it seemed he would fall and never rise again, but he straightened, his chest heaving, eyes blazing with something stronger than blood loss. Something carved from duty, from defiance, from the weight of every oath he had ever sworn. He lifted his revolver again, slow and deliberate. Cole's smirk widened. He raised his own weapon for the final strike. The two men stood framed by the rising sun, light flashing off their barrels. For one breathless instant, time froze. Elias fired. The shot rang sharp, truer than any he had ever made. Cole's smile faltered. His body lurched, revolver slipping from his hand. He stumbled backward, boots splashing into the shallows. The lake embraced him with a hiss, water swallowing his last breath. He sank beneath the rippling surface, his shadow twisting once before vanishing. Silence reclaimed the valley. Then slowly, the crowd exhaled. Riders exchanged uneasy glances, their courage broken. One by one, they wheeled their horses and fled, their hoofbeats fading into the trees. Villagers lowered their rifles. Mothers wept. Fathers bowed their heads. Clara dropped to her knees at the shoreline. Her hands smeared with blood, hers, Elias's, Cole's, trembled as she dipped them into the cold water. Crimson threads unraveled into ripples, carried away by the lake that had seen too much death. Helen knelt beside her, wrapping strong arms around her daughter's shoulders. Her voice was soft but steady. "You carried us all, Clara. Through fire and shadow you carried us." The first full light of morning broke over the lake, gilding the water. Elias, swaying but alive, lowered his revolver. He turned to the crowd, his voice hoarse. "The treaty stands. Let no man break it again." In the days that followed, the settlement began to rebuild. Charred beams were cleared, new planks raised. The old bridge was mended, its timbers stronger than before, the earth beneath it holding no secrets now but memory. The treaty, sealed and guarded, was sent to higher courts, its words no longer buried in mud but alive in the hands of those it had promised to protect. Clara walked the length of the repaired bridge one evening as the sun set, her shadow long across the boards. She paused halfway, gazing down into the water. The lake reflected her face clearly now, not fractured by torchlight or storm. It was the face of someone who had borne fear, betrayal, and blood, and still remained standing. For the first time in her life, the water was still. Peace lay upon it like a blessing. Yet when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke, the reflection wavered, showing her face half in shadow, half in light. She understood then. Peace was never free. It had to be carried, guarded, kept alive. And whether she had asked for it or not, she was now the keeper of that legacy. The lake rippled once more, and Clara Ferrer turned away, walking on into the light.